So good morning. Thank you for joining us, the Regional Planning Graduate Studio for the fall of 2024. We would like to begin this presentation with an urgent message before sharing details of the critical work we have engaged with over the course of the last 14 weeks. We are at a critical juncture in the fight against climate change. We are inundated with news about rising temperatures, extreme weather events, devastating coastal and inland flooding, severe drought and displacement across our nation, and personally experience and feel these impacts at the local level right here in our own communities across southern New England. As the effects of climate change continue to plague our communities, devastate our built environment, and uproot and further isolate communities disproportionately, we are taking a multidimensional approach to mitigation, taking immediate action at the local level. We will discuss how municipalities can take feasible and bold, strategic and impactful, calculated and purposeful action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and mitigate climate change effects with immediacy. The recommendations to follow are not goals listed on the appendix of a shelved plan. They're achievable, actionable solutions that promote resiliency to be replicated and instituted across the New England region and beyond. Together, our studio has built the foundation for a more sustainable future, tying policy to action and making impracticable goals and priorities possible, driven by action, prescribe the appropriate authority to implement, and supported by existing financial opportunities at the federal, regional, state, and local levels. Our work to be discussed in the following sections is made possible through the Environmental Protection Agency's Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program, mobilized by the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022, which provides funding to support regional and local governments in developing and implementing climate action plans. This funding allows us to collaborate with our client, the State of Connecticut South Central Regional Council of Government and the Naugatuck Valley Council of Government, located in the New Haven-Milford metropolitan area. The main objective of our work is to deliver climate action recommendations for cities and towns within the areas of Connecticut specified on the map, creating actionable strategies that have long-lasting impacts. I would like to take a moment to mention that our study area encompasses 27 cities and towns, each with its own distinct characteristics. This is not a uniform region. There is considerable diversity across urban, suburban, and rural areas. These communities represent cross-cutting differences between the physical environment and political, social, and economic factors. This diversity shapes the different challenges and opportunities each community faces in advancing climate action. Regional planning work is difficult. It must be comprehensive but specific, wide-ranging but not too general, and extensive but also inclusive. Our work makes specific recommendations based on a myriad of unique conditions that each community harbors. Our diverse backgrounds have helped us understand these differences and challenges from varying perspectives. Our studio is composed of professionals of a variety of backgrounds, with skills and experiences complementary to one another to best actuate realistic climate action. We are students, planners, economists, architects, technologists, data scientists, and empowered leaders. Through diligent work, robust community engagement, research and development, and the instruction of a great leader, we have set out on a mission. Our mission is to make addressing climate change in an uncertain future as easy as possible, with community buy-in and support, and flexible and adaptable resources and tools for local governments. Krishan will now explain how we have activated this mission.
Morning, everyone. So as we dive into this section, I want to talk about the backbone of our work this semester, the PCAP and the CCAP. Think of these as the blueprint and the next chapter in our region's climate action story. Let's start by grounding ourselves in what's already been accomplished and what we are building forward. Now, here's a roadmap of where we've been and where we are headed. This journey started last August with the previous cohort, delivering the PCAP in March. Our studio picked up the baton, driving towards the CCAP deadline next December. But this isn't the finish line. This project will live on, culminating in 2027 with the final status report. Think of this as passing a relay torch, with just one chapter in a story that's far from over. Now, last year's studio laid the foundation with the Priority Climate Action Plan, the PCAP. Their work was nothing short of monumental. It identified what needs to be done to mitigate climate change sector by sector. Transportation, electricity, energy efficiency, industry, waste management, working lands, and forestry. Each got a spotlight with actionable strategies and measurable benefits. But strategy is only half the story. They also asked, can it be done today? And more importantly, by whom? This brought the concept of authority to implement into sharp focus, identifying which levels of government, federal, state, regional, and local, hold the power to turn ideas into action. They also developed the strategies with the recognition that CPRG is a part of the Biden-Harris administration's Justice Party initiative. Justice Party mandates 40% of all overall benefits of certain federal investments flow to low-income and disadvantaged communities, or LIDACs, which are most vulnerable to climate change. The result? A comprehensive plan with 29 goals and 58 implementation-ready, high-priority strategies that aim to create an equitable climate future for all in New Haven County. That's a lot of ambition, but what's great about the PCAP is that it wasn't just about dreaming big. It was about making big dreams possible. Now, this year, we are picking up where the PCAP left off with the Comprehensive Climate Action Plan, the CCAP. Our studio is building on that work with a focus on deeper analysis and actionable tools. Think of it like renovating an already solid house and turning it into a climate resilient fortress. And we're not doing it alone. Our studio, alongside SLR Consulting, Caramita, the NARS Lab, and our incredible clients, SCR Cog and NV Cog, is working to ensure that this plan delivers on its promises. From setting GHG targets to analyzing the workforce needed to get there, to projecting future emissions, we are connecting all the dots. Here's where it gets exciting. While the EPA requires the authority to implement, we've gone further. We've added two powerful tools for our regional and local partners. First, the Municipal Emission Reduction Playbooks, which we are calling the MURPs, which are like cheat sheets for local governments to implement strategies. And the second are the Future Engagement Strategy, ensuring this effort stays alive and dynamic. This isn't just a plan, it's a playbook for real change. And now, let's talk about the core of this work, the authority to implement. This is the heart of the CCAP, where we take those strategies and translate them into action. But don't just take my word for it. I'll pass it over to my colleague, Mike, who will walk us through how these strategies come to life through the authority framework. The floor is yours, Mike.
Thank you, Crash. Before I explain what our study created for authority to implement, it is important to understand the government structure of Connecticut. Like Massachusetts, Connecticut is a home rule state, meaning that any authority not explicitly reserved by the state belongs to municipalities. Empowering every individual community can make regional collaboration difficult, as different towns have different priorities. Our clients, SCROG and NVCOG, are councils of government, or COGs, of which there are 9 statewide. While they can advise and bring their member towns together for discussion, they lack authority to drive policy or enforce compliance. Ultimately, the implementation of most strategies in the CCAP will fall to individual towns, but the negative effects of climate change do not respect town boundaries. Regional governance structures, like the COGs, are vital to coordinate activities between towns and to equip them with knowledge and tools to continue reducing emissions. Meanwhile, state and national governance can support strategy implementation at the town level. In this way, every level of governance can contribute to reducing emissions. Because the ability to implement emissions reduction varies by level of government, the EPA requires that the CCAP include a detailed breakdown of authority to implement. Each of the 58 strategies is best implemented at different levels of governance. In the PCAP, authority to implement was limited to identifying which levels of governance had authority, that is, local, regional, state, or federal. The CCAP authority to implement goes into greater detail. For the CCAP authority to implement, for every emissions reduction strategy, we examined each level of governance and asked ourselves what tactics are needed to implement this strategy at this level. We then determined if this level of governance has the authority to implement that tactic. Are there legal barriers to implementation? Municipalities possess the broadest authority to implement strategies. Under Home Rule, they can pass ordinances directly implementing a strategy with very few exceptions. The state is much more constrained, as it cannot impose an emissions reduction strategy on towns without legislation. If we found that a particular level of governance lacks authority, we developed a schedule to obtain authority, identifying what needs to be done over the next decade to obtain authority for a particular level of governance on a strategy. The schedule contains actions divided into two periods: short-term over the next 5 years and long-term over the beyond 5 years. The CCAP authority to implement must also identify relevant funding sources. Through our exploration of authority to implement, we identified over 100 potential funding sources, primarily grants. In doing this research, we identified that the performance period of the grants and the relevant deadlines almost entirely fell before the submission of the CCAP in December of 2025. Therefore, we decided to zoom out and look at relevant funding agencies. We identified 30 different funding entities overall. These include federal agencies like the U.S. Department of Energy and state agencies like the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. Now I can show you a piece of the final authority to implement document, which is over there on the table. For every one of the 58 strategies, there is a table explaining the authority to implement across every relevant level of governance. Here we have a screenshot of one of those tables, showing the authority to implement for transportation strategy 9A, which achieves greenhouse gas emission reductions by advertising and increasing usage of Connecticut's cheaper electric and hybrid vehicle rebate program. In keeping with the goals of Justice 40, this strategy is targeted at low and middle income residents, who can also qualify for the Rebate Plus portion of the cheaper program, which offers an even larger incentive. This strategy is focused on communication. Getting the word out is an important part of emissions reduction. In our outreach, it was identified that existing programs are not always well understood by residents, even if they are otherwise enthusiastic about reducing emissions. Multiple levels of governance were identified as having a role in implementation of this strategy, but here we have just identified the state level. At the state level of authority, we identified one tactic for the implementation of this strategy. Other strategies have multiple tactics at each level of governance. To ensure that low and middle income communities are aware of the program, the state should provide funds directly to towns to conduct outreach. Municipalities in our study area with designated low or middle income communities, such as LIDACs, are better suited to communicate the benefits of the program to their own residents. The law establishing the CHEAP program charges Connecticut's Department of Energy and Environmental Protection with administering the program and conducting outreach. But it does not explicitly aim outreach at low and middle income communities, nor does it provide resources for towns to conduct their own outreach. The state does not currently have the authority to implement this tactic. So now we come to the schedule to obtain authority. In order to obtain authority for this tactic, the state could amend the law creating the CHEAP program to require additional funding from municipalities to advertise the program. As this is an amendment to an existing law, we are confident that this change could occur in the next 5 years. So we note it as short-term on the table. As I said at the beginning of this example, state is only one level of government authority for this strategy. Towns have authority to begin implementing this tactic, even without additional support from the state. They could include information about the program in more places. They could form a volunteer committee that could generate enthusiasm for the program, connecting with organizations within low and middle income communities. Across strategies, municipalities have the greatest latitude in implementing emissions reduction strategies, but every level of governance matters. In the statewide PCAP, the state proposed expanding rebates to include medium and heavy-duty vehicles. Along with that, the state could also look at communicating the rebate program better by funding town outreach work. This way, more people can take advantage of these rebates, further decarbonizing personal vehicles throughout the state and in the New Haven-Milford MSA. The 58 strategies in our authority to implement can interact with each other in important ways. For select strategies, the authority to implement tables will include an identification of a groundwork strategy, a complementary strategy that works best if implemented first. The strategy just used in this example, Transportation Strategy 9A, happens to be a groundwork strategy. Another strategy, Transportation Strategy 10, is about encouraging the electrification of rideshare vehicles. By connecting more people with electric vehicle rebates in strategy T9A, communities can also encourage rideshare drivers to switch to electric vehicles. Advancing to T10. The authority to implement tables make it clear whenever a groundwork strategy is useful. I will switch to one more example strategy to explain how we included existing funding opportunities in our authority to implement tables. Industry Strategy 2 reduces greenhouse gas emissions by encouraging the hiring of firms that monitor their emissions for public projects. The regional and local levels of government both have a role to play in implementing this strategy. The COGs have a role to play regionally, convening member towns together, encouraging them to contract with firms that report emissions. At the local level, municipalities have the authority to modify their purchasing criterion for suppliers. They have this authority because they operate within Connecticut's home rule law. Funding agencies for the implementation of the strategy at the regional and local level include the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and the Department of Energy. These agencies were identified based on two specific grants, the EPA's Environmental Product Declaration Assistance and the Department of Energy's Methane Monitoring Grants. Both grants are funded by money from the Inflation Reduction Act, which will not be available indefinitely. But the EPA and the DOE are two agencies that will likely continue to offer support around tasks like emissions reporting. In this presentation, I was able to show you a few of our strategies and 4 tactics. The final product includes tables for all 58 emissions reduction strategies and over 150 tactics for implementing them. It's a monumental document. In-depth research and knowledge from our engagement went into every single tactic. Doing this required the 8 of us to carefully coordinate our research methods and how we thought about each strategy as planners. We learned about solar heating and the emissions impact of hospitals. We discovered the potential of green hydrogen as a cleaner fuel source and about how some reservoirs emit potent greenhouse gases, all while meeting with planners and community members to learn which strategies mean the most to them. The AT2I includes takeaways from all this amazing planning work. Having done all this, we also recognize that a well-laid plan may come undone when circumstances change. As we've explored the authority to implement, we've seen that implementing even one strategy in the current moment requires understanding a complex web of authority and overcoming existing barriers to implementation. However, the future is full of twists and turns, new policies, shifting technologies, unexpected climate events. These can all change who has the authority to implement a given strategy. The question is, how do we make plans that don't break under the weight of an unpredictable future? Well, that's where scenario planning steps in. And with that, let me hand it over to Krishang to take us on this journey.
Thanks, Mike. That was amazing. So, the question is, what is scenario planning really? It's not about predicting the future. Trust me, if I could do that, I'd be sitting in a sunny villa with a crystal ball. Scenario planning is about resilience. It's about asking the question, what if? What if politics shift? What if technology leapfrogs? What if the climate hits us harder than we ever expected? It's our way of preparing for the unknown so we don't get blindsided. Now, let's take a look at this. Here's your classic straight arrow plan, simple, linear, and frankly, naive, because reality doesn't play by those rules. Along the way, we'll encounter branching paths, political change, scientific breakthroughs, or even a catastrophic climate event. These changes force us to pivot, to adapt, and that's where scenario planning shines. It helps us stay flexible, grounded in the present, but prepared for any fork in the road. Now, we introduced these scenarios during our midterm, but let's quickly revisit them. First, fossil-free future, a world where policy, funding, and innovation come together to decarbonize rapidly. Think offshore wind farms, hydrogen fuel cells, and the renewable energy revolution. It's a dream scenario, but a tough one to reach. Oh boy. Now, coping with gridlock. Here, the government is slow, divided, and frankly, unhelpful. Private initiatives step up, but progress is fragmented and inequitable. Think local efforts battling against a tide of inertia. And finally, watershed moment. This is the wake-up call, a scenario where climate impacts hit hard, but society begins to act. It's messy, it's even uneven, but it's also the beginning of a turning point. Each of these scenarios gives us a lens, a way to test whether our plans hold up under different futures. Now, let's see how scenario planning transforms the path of the strategy Mike was talking about in the A2I section. Encouraging EV adoption in low and middle income communities through cheaper incentives and short term rebates. And let's see how authority to implement plays a crucial role here. Now, in a fossil free future, this strategy shines. Strong policy support and robust funding make enhanced rebate the norm, fueling widespread EV adoption. It's a win win. Cleaner air, lower emissions, and economic benefits for underrepresented communities, with no barriers to authority holding things back. But in gridlock, things slow down. With the state authority weakened, the expansion and advertising of cheaper is left unsupported, and it becomes fragmented, locally driven effort. Some towns might step up, but the lack of coordination leads to patchy adoption. The private sector might try to fill the void, but it's an uphill battle. Now, in a watershed moment, the stakes are a little higher. Although the state retains its authority to implement, climate impacts create urgency, and EV rebates could skyrocket in response. But there's the catch. Limited resources and competing priorities might sideline the most vulnerable communities, creating equity challenges in implementation. Now, do you see the dynamic here? Can you visualize how the authority or the lack of it changes the game in each scenario? Scenario planning doesn't just tell us where the cracks might appear. It helps us design strategies resilient enough to succeed, even under pressure. Because when we stress test our ideas, we are not just planning for one future, we are preparing for all of them. So, why do scenarios matter? Because the world doesn't wait for perfect plans. As evident from our last slide, by using scenarios, we make our plans adaptable, robust, and dare I say, future-proof. Scenarios help us uncover blind spots, ensure equity, and deliver solutions that stand the test of time. They're not just a tool, they're a way of thinking. But here's the real beauty. Scenarios aren't just theoretical. They're shaping how we develop our municipal emission reduction playbooks, which we're calling the MURPs. These playbooks are tailored, actionable, and informed by everything we have learned from the authority to implement and scenario planning. And with that, I'll hand it over to Carl to show you how these MURPs came to life.
Thanks so much, Crash. Hi, everybody. So I think that the A2I is really going to stand out to the EPA, but the A2I is also not a plan. It's like a chapter in a plan or a telephone book, which has a lot of information, but it's not as useful as your personal address book. We are trying to make climate change mitigation doable at the local level. So you need to know which strategies work best for you. And that is what the Municipal Emissions Reductions Playbooks, or MURPs, which I love saying, are built to do. Think back to the slide that we showed of the diversity of New Haven County. Each town in New Haven County has a different geography, different demographics, and different regional planning. And for this reason, not all the strategies will apply to each town equally. Some strategies aren't relevant to every town. The energy sector strategy about capping hydroelectric facilities' methane emissions affects only 2 towns in New Haven County. So what do we do with that? Also, some of these strategies can't be done locally under the findings of the A2I. They can only be handled at the regional level or greater, such as the first of our land use strategies, which relates to county-wide afforestation. In addition to this component of relevance, individual towns are all at different levels of readiness to implement any given policy. Some towns are already working on them. Some have fully ready implementations, and others haven't even started. And the strategies have variable impacts on greenhouse gas emissions. Some strategies reduce greenhouse gases less than others. And a certain set of them can't really be quantified. We have quite a few strategies which are about supporting things or advocating for things, but we can't really measure their direct impact on greenhouse gas emissions as easily. And some of these strategies are also specific to LIDACs, about reducing transit fares in LIDACs, in low-income and disadvantaged communities. And we can't forget those strategies. They need their due. And on top of all that, as Crash showed us, the viability or impact of any particular plan or strategy can change under different future conditions. So all of these problems amount to scores of considerations that have to be taken into account when recommending a set of strategies to a town. And that's driven the design of the MURPs both as a tool for the end user and as a planning method in itself. So this is what I worry a planner might see when leafing through the authority to implement. Each of these cards represents a PCAP mitigation strategy, and it's a big disorganized pile. Which one do you even pick up first? In order to be fair to the town planner, we need to help them sort this out. Our MURPs approach this by breaking strategies out into groups. We identify what's effective in the equitable reduction of greenhouse gas emissions and what isn't. We assess what makes sense for a town planner in the current moment as opposed to things that they can put on hold. We then use these classifications to make groups like the ones you see above. That's the magic of MURPs, as my colleague Audrey put it yesterday. And it's a dead simple means of sifting through the PCAP strategies so you can focus on what will push the needle when you're working with limited resources. Time is money. We break the PCAP strategies into 4 groups differently for each town. High impact strategies one should get started on, and those in motion to keep working on. On the lower end of this impact, we split them into strategies that are already in place that can be paused because they aren't highly effective. In gray, we have the strategies that they aren't even working on, which are also low impact. So they should be your lowest priority. Let's take a look at Waterbury's MURP to see it in action. So big reveal, everybody, it's a spreadsheet, but it's a really, really good spreadsheet in my opinion. And it's got a clean and straightforward interface to browse the strategies within our decision matrix. So what I showed you in the last slide is what the planner sees here. We're looking at Waterbury's MURP. The matrix above shows the total count of strategies assigned to each group. The names that we're using here are start, continue, deprioritize, and pause. And descriptive labels have been included below each one to give the planner additional guidance at every step. Below the matrix here, we show them the strategies that the MURPs algorithm identifies for starting and continuing. On the left-hand side is the high-impact strategies that you're ready to start and you haven't. The right-hand side are strategies that you're already doing that are totally worthwhile to continue. Each strategy indicates its presence. Each strategy indicates its presence in town plans, the town's readiness to start it, and its estimated cost range. And strategies that are specific to low-income and disadvantaged communities are called out with blue dots. There are more columns in here for its presence in the plans of conservation and development and its levels of readiness that reflect the research that's been done at the town level. And I want to turn to that town level research. So here's what it looks like at the town level scale, almost in totality. This is about a third of the total research that goes into one town MERP. It's obviously not fit to cram onto a slide. So let's focus on one line, broken down to the individual variables. So we need to assess where Waterbury is at with reducing greenhouse gas emissions from its wastewater treatment facilities. And this is strategy energy 5 or E05. There are three main pieces of information that we're looking for. Have they already begun working on this? They have. Is it in their plans of conservation and development? It's not. Are they ready? They are ready. Altogether, these data points determine whether it falls on the side of ready or not ready. Unfortunately, it's quite a low impact strategy according to our sorting, and it will go into pause. Here are the calibrations, which are the data that becomes the important part that pushes them into the top or bottom half of the matrix. And I've done it again, and I'm very sorry. I've shown too much data all at once. What matters is the sources of the data that we're using because they're very solid. And it matters how they're being put together. Greenhouse gas inventory and impact data from the PCAP and our partners at NARS Lab and our own qualitative assessments of these strategies comprise the environmental aspect of each strategy score. And LIDAC strategies are given the emphasis that they deserve. As a bonus, each of these data sets can be tweaked by the user if they want to, if they feel like what we've produced for them isn't perfect fit. And I'd like to show how all that data is being combined to make these tailored selections of the MERPs in a visual manner, because many of us think visually and we need that metaphor to understand what's going on, and I definitely do. So let's go back to our big unsorted pile. The first thing we want to do is identify the strategies that had unquantifiable greenhouse gas mitigation potential and the ones that aren't locally actionable. So we can set those aside. We then identify which strategies have the most potential. This occurs on our calibrations sheet, where we synthesize our qualitative and quantitative information to produce informed impact scores. As a final part of the calculation, strategies specific to LIDACs get a bump as well as the equity consideration. So now that they're sorted by importance and the ones that are lower impact have been reduced, what floats to the top is those that have high impact and high equitability, and what sinks to the bottom doesn't. So now we bring in what we know from the scoring sheet that we've collected, what they're working on and what they're not, and we can split them out into the sides. So once again, we're back at our decision-making matrix. And this same process is going to be baked into the creation of every town's MERP. So why did we do all this? We knew from the start that we couldn't just drop 56 strategies on the desk of every planner in the region and tell them to figure it out. Instead, we've chosen to make something that carefully considers each town's unique characteristics, because what we want to use New Haven County's diversity to the project's advantage, to their advantage. And by splitting up our efforts and looking at each town really closely, but also with a research methodology and structure that let us all work effectively in sync, Waterbury and each of the 25 towns in New Haven County will get something that is specifically tailored to them, that clarifies how to take action on greenhouse gas emissions, both right now and into an uncertain future. Scaling up this type of planning to the regional level is really difficult. And the New Haven Milford MSA includes these 27 diverse cities and towns. So we developed this a framework for decision-making alongside months of qualitative research and development. This work involved deep community involvement and engagement and hands-on field work across the region. And I'm going to hand it off now to Amelia, who's going to explain to you more about how we approach this.
Thanks, Carl. So the scope of our project requires the application of community involvement in two ways. One, applying feedback obtained from community outreach events, public forums, roundtables, and gameplay to inform practical strategies and tactics to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in municipalities. And two, to develop engagement tools that planners and other stakeholders can use to spark conversation and discourse surrounding climate action far after the priority and comprehensive climate action plans have been disseminated. Related to the former, we have engaged communities through our study area over the course of the last 14 weeks. In September, we have visited cities and towns in our study area as reflected on the map. We attended and tabled at a green energy fair, quizzing attendees on climate change related issues. During this time and throughout the course of the project timeline, we met with planners and town officials to discuss our work and their efforts related to climate action. Tabling events and planner meetings informed our work to be more representative of the actual people who reside in the communities we are working to provide climate mitigation solutions for. In October, we tabled at a sustainability fair, presented our work thus far to the SCR-COG Regional Planning Commission, engaged with residents, attended a statewide CPRG forum, and further developed climate action gameplay with students. We also presented our midterm, inviting feedback from a host of stakeholders to better inform our work. Students' events helped us to nail down our gameplay devices and provide useful interactive strategies for discussion about climate action. The CPRG forum allowed our studio to engage with experts and laymen alike, deep diving into the sectors of major GHG emitters across the state of Connecticut and understanding feedback about the strategies developed to mitigate emissions. In November, we toured more cities and towns in our study area, discussed feasibility of strategies with planners and COG representatives, tabled local events in collaboration with SLR Consulting, and continued to hone our engagement tools. Planner input informed the development of authority to implement a municipal emissions reduction playbook, strategies, and tactics based on feasibility, relative capacity, and the understanding of prescribed strategies for the greater region. The responses recorded from the aforementioned events, coupled with thorough research and development, as described by Carl, of the cities and towns in our study area, helped inform the tactics involved in our A2I document, as well as feasible strategies based on common conditions of local communities. Community engagement has been a pillar of our project development. We recognize that towns are ultimately responsible for implementing climate action that aligns with specific conditions of their communities. Thus, climate change planning requires community support and assessing real community needs. To ease this process, we have developed tools to facilitate engagement with an educational focus, helping planners to involve residents while assessing your town's current conditions and readiness to support various initiatives. The first engagement tool, as shown on the table and on the boards, is the game coined Emissions Impossible, where participants take on stakeholder roles to explore the complexities of climate planning. Players are also assigned personal agendas associated with their role to compete with other participants. This approach highlights the difficult trade-offs, budgeting challenges, and diverse perspectives of everyone involved in this process. We've also developed interactive games such as Mythbusters and Would You Rather, as described by Carl in our MERP section, to test the participants' knowledge of emissions impacts by sector, tasking them with making trade-offs. Additionally, we have developed a meeting in a box or meeting in a tote, a comprehensive kit that equips facilitators with everything needed to conduct a productive discussion about climate action. These efforts align with our mission, making climate change in the New Haven Milford metropolitan area as easy as possible while acknowledging future uncertainties. We ensure that the tools we have developed will mobilize community members and representatives alike to take action. Also, as noted in our project timeline, SCR-COG, NV-COG, and SLR Consulting will continue stakeholder engagement and community outreach events following the end of our studio. Engagement will continue over the course of the next year as the CCAP is due in December of 2025. Finally, and most recently, we have redesigned our page on the CPRG website to house the interactive MERP documents along with priority and comprehensive climate action plans. Our goal is to make navigating our website and accessing deliverables as simple and transparent as possible. I will now hand it off to Krish to wrap up our presentation.
Thanks, Amelia. Okay, now let's take a moment to reflect on where we've been today. This graphic represents the heart of our project. 5 key elements, each one a vital gear in the machine driving climate change action. We began with the PCAP and CCAP, laying the groundwork, building the vision. This was the blueprint, the bold what of our work. From there, we explored the authority to implement, the how. We identified who holds the keys, how to unlock funding, and how to make these bold visions a reality. But then we asked ourselves, what happens when the world throws a curveball? That's where scenario planning stepped in. Because let's face it, no one could have predicted the twists and turns we've seen over the past few days or even past few decades. It's like planning a road trip and realizing halfway through that the map has changed. Using scenarios, we prepared ourselves for uncertainty, and those insights shaped the municipal emission reduction playbooks, which were tailored, actionable guides to reduce emissions. And we didn't stop there. With the community engagement tools, we made sure that these plans weren't just sitting on a shelf, but resonated with the people who will bring them to life. These 5 elements together are greater than the sum of their parts. They're connected in a seamless cycle, each one feeding into the next to create momentum. The PCAP flows into the CCAP. The CCAP informs the authority shapes the playbooks, and the playbooks engage communities. And then it all circles back, each phase reinforcing and improving the next. This isn't just a plan, it's an evolving process. A process designed to adapt, endure, and lead. And together, we've not just mapped a path forward, we have reimagined what's possible. Yeah, we're almost there. Okay, so before we wrap up, let's take a moment to recognize the incredible people who have made this work possible. First, to our client, the South Central Regional Council of Governments, represented here by Stephanie Camp and Ian McKelvey, and to Christina Neal from Naugatuck Valley Council of Governments. Thank you for trusting us to take on this vital work and for your steadfast guidance throughout the journey. We owe a huge thank you to Benjamin Lovejoy, former Regional Planning Director at SCR-COG and current Project Manager at Connecticut State Department of Housing, who initiated this project and partnership between SCR-COG and UMass, and laid the foundation for everything we have accomplished today. To our partners, Jimmy O'Kay and Bayao Shao from the NORS Lab, Pamela Green from SLR Consulting, and the team at Caramida. Your expertise and collaboration have been invaluable. And of course, a special thank you to Stacy Richardson, AJ Pion, and the amazing LARP faculty and staff who supported us every step of the way. And to the amazing Professor Camille Barchers. Your leadership, mentorship, and belief in us has nothing short of transformative. Your wisdom has not only guided this project, but has inspired us to think bigger, dig deeper, and aim higher. Professor Barchers, you're the reason this studio has felt less like a course and more like a calling. From the entire team, thank you. Also to our amazing studio TA, Samiksha, who has been a rock throughout this project, keeping us organized, answering our endless questions, and helping us refine our ideas to perfection. Samiksha, you've been our unsung hero. Thank you for everything. It's often said that it takes a village, but in our case, it took councils, labs, consultants, faculty, and quite frankly, a lot of coffee. Decaf in case of Andrew. To all of you, thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Your belief in this work and in us as a team has been our greatest motivation. And now we'd like to hear from you. So as you've seen, this project is a bold step forward, but it's only a chapter. The CPRG timeline reminds us that there's a long road ahead, work to build on, milestones to achieve, and more impact to make. This isn't the finish line. It's a step towards something truly transformational. Now we'll begin with questions from our clients, SR Cog, Stephanie, and Ian, and then we'll open the floor to the rest of the room. For those joining us on Zoom, don't worry, we'll alternate between in-person and virtual questions to ensure everyone has a chance to participate. Stephanie and Ian, the floor is yours. Let's dive in.